So, good evening, Armitage Baptist Church. It's so awesome to be here with you guys tonight. This whole time, it has taken everything to hold back tears because this is a journey. This moment here with you all tonight is 7 years in the making. It has been a journey. It has been a road. It's been an adventure. And God has been utilizing the time in my life, and my wife's life, and the time of our team to bring about something spectacular within our hearts and in our souls. And He's brought us to us together in this moment, 2018, to do something spectacular for Him. And that's what we believe. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about that journey. A little over 7 years ago, myself and Kevin, who's here with his wife tonight, he's part of our, they're both part of our team. Kevin, we lived together, we went to Liberty together. He was on my leadership team. He's always been on my leadership team. We're probably going to be buried next to each other. That's kind of, it's going to be me, my wife, and Kevin and Sam. That's how it's going to go. We've known each other for almost 10 years now. And it's been an amazing, amazing thing. Well, about a little over 7 years ago, we were there at Liberty University, as Pastor Steve mentioned, and we knew we wanted to plant a church. We received the call to church planting, and we didn't know where we wanted to go, or where, rather, God would have us to go. And I begged and pleaded with the Lord, please don't send me home back to Woodbridge, Virginia. That was the only, and I said, please don't send me someplace hot, because chocolate melts, okay? I don't want to, I can't do it. I love Chicago because it's cold and praise the Lamb that it is, right? And there's a constant breeze. So I needed to go somewhere where chocolate was less likely to melt, and it was to remain a solid. So Kevin and I spent about 2 weeks fasting and prayer, and we came back together and kind of shared where God had been laying on our hearts. And it was Chicago. So we were college students, and typical college student fashion, we were broke. So what we decided to do was we reached out to any and every church that we could for our spring break. While everyone else was going to the beach, we drove here from Lynchburg, Virginia, a 14-hour drive. Come on, amen. In my F-150, mind you, 4 tanks of gas, one way. So we got here, and man, God broke our hearts for this city. And He burdened us with a passion and a desire to be here, to spread His gospel, to build a church that its desire, its ultimate goal is to be a multi-ethnic, multi-generational, mission-shaped community where people can experience freedom in Christ and hope for an eternal future. That's why we call ourselves Freedom Hope Church. It's not just what we do, it's who we are. And so tonight I wanted to share with you something that has almost come full circle. Because this moment has been a moment that we've dreamt about together, that we've pressed for together. It's not just me and my attributes and my gifts that you see before you. It's my wife, it's Chris, it's Sam, it's Kevin, and all of those who believed in us and poured into us to see Jesus' name be made great among the city of Chicago. And so tonight I wanted to go into a book. One of my favorite books is the book of Nehemiah. And I love the book of Nehemiah because his story so correlates with our own. But before we dive into the word tonight, I want to ask you these 3 questions. And I want you to really think on these things. The first question is, when was the last time that you fought for something? When was the last time that you fought for something? The second question is this: when was the last time you sought after a God-given vision? When was the last time that you knew that God had placed something in your heart and you fought for it and you ran after it? My third question to you is this: when was the last time that you trusted God when it made no sense, when it seemed impossible, when it just baffled your mind? Did you trust him? And so tonight, from Nehemiah chapter 4, I want to give you 4 reminders of how to fight for what God has given you. And as we go into Nehemiah chapter 4, I love this correlation between the 2 books. The book that precedes Nehemiah is Ezra. And to help you better understand how these books are connected, a lot of scholars even believe that it's actually one giant book. But Ezra is about the people, the Jews, reclaiming the call. In Ezra, the Jews are coming back to their home place. And Ezra, being the prophet, one of the prophets at that time, is about to read the word of God aloud to the people. Something that should have been done quite often, but had not been done in many, many years. They have been split up from captivity to, they'd be free one moment, another kingdom would come in and captive them, and then they would kind of be under their oppression and their rule. But in Ezra, we see a reclaiming of what is theirs. And then in Nehemiah, we see a rebuilding of their home. And so what we're about to experience here in Nehemiah chapter 4 is that at the beginning in the book of Nehemiah, we see that he's risen through the ranks of Artaxerxes' rule, and he is the cupbearer to the king. Now, Nehemiah experiences something that Kevin and I experienced, that everyone on our team has experienced before even coming here. Like, we have no relatives, we have no family here, we have no strong connections here. This is a place we had never been to. Like, this wasn't even on one of the places on my radar to come and visit before I died. You understand? Like, it was that, nothing against where you live, where I live, but it's just, at that time, it wasn't on my mind. There's nowhere, like, well, I got to get to Chicago. Like, that wasn't a thought that crossed my mind. But the beautiful thing about Nehemiah is in Nehemiah chapter 1, you see a man who is broken over his own people, but there's a people that he really did not know. It was a place that he had never visited. He had never seen with his own eyes the place of his forefathers. And it was a calling that was so heavy and so burdensome that he wept over the people and the place he did not know and he had not been to. That's a deep passion and burden for some place and some people that you've never seen, that you've never met, that you don't know who they are, you don't know how they're going to respond to you, how they're going to react to you, if they're going to welcome you, love you, or hate you. And despite any of that, he did it anyway. And all the years that he had been cupbearer to the king, he had never once shown that he was sad. And so that day when he showed himself sad over the weeping of his people, the king looked at him and said, "Why is your countenance so down?" And Nehemiah, before he answered him, he did something extremely important that I think we lose sight of. He prayed. He prayed to God before he answered the king. And as he's doing this, he's laying a beautiful foundation and framework for how we ought to live our lives. The king would go on and grant him with all the materials he would need to rebuild the walls of a torn down city, to restore and rebuild its dignity as a people. So as we get to Nehemiah chapter 4, the walls are being rebuilt, and the workers are working. And now in chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, now when Sanballat, who's an enemy of Nehemiah, heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of heaps of rubbish and burned ones?" It says Tobiah the Amorite was beside him, and he said, "Yes, what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall." And then Nehemiah breaks into a prayer. And he goes into verse 4, he says, "Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders. So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together, half its height, for the people had a mind to work. Remember that, the people had a mind to work. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that they were repairing the walls of Jerusalem was going forward, and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. And what did they do? Verse 9, and we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. Verse 10, in Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much rubble. By ourselves, we will not be able to rebuild the wall. And verse 10 is so powerful because I read this verse, I read this chapter, and I think none but Jesus can rebuild the wall of my life. None but Jesus can remove the foundation and get rid of all the things that were terrible and made my life and my foundation feeble and the things that I believed in. And he began a work in me, and he did the dirty work. He dug out the things in my life that needed to be removed, and he is going to replace it with the greatest cornerstone in the universe. He's going to sacrifice for me. And the Lord did that, and he has done everything else that has been done in us that has been done worth doing. In verse 11, it says, and our enemies said that they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. And at that time the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, you must return to us. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall and open places, I stationed the people by their clans, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. When our enemies heard that it was known to us that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. And from that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and half held spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon in the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he was built. And the man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. And I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread, and we are separated on the wall far from one another. In the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears from the break of dawn until the stars came out. I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be guard for us by night and may labor by day. So neither I, nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. The first thing that I want you to remember is this, that when you're going to fight for something, it starts on your knees. It starts in prayer. God's people should always regard prayer not as a last resort, but as our primary weapon against opposition. Because when the calling comes, the first thing that we should be able to do is respond in prayer. It's communicating with God. It's getting his heart, his desires, his understanding of how we ought to be. And we should understand that Nehemiah's request that God would not forgive their sin in verse 5 was referring to their sin as opposition to the builders, not all of their sins, but their sins against the builders who were rebuilding the walls. And the people who committed those sins, who were sneering at the work that God had commanded. And so the prayer was not vindictive, but the Jews were insulted because God was ridiculed by these people. Nehemiah was asking God to take vengeance. Why? Because that's his work. That's not ours. And so we have to understand, and that's what Nehemiah understood, that a revival began in his heart in chapter 1 when he was there in the face of the king. And now what we see in chapter 4 is a people who have a mind to work, who are building a wall and restoring the dignity of their city. But Nehemiah isn't doing it just because it's fun. He's not doing it because he's going to get fame or notoriety. He's doing it simply because he was called and commanded to do and lead this work. Because what God calls you to, he will supply. And he will rally people around you who have a mind like you to do the work. And so the reason why we must always begin with prayer is because soon ahead there is difficulty, and we have to remember that secondly, there will always be opposition to the work. There will always be opposition to the work. Just last Sunday, we were able to visit our sending church in Virginia, Northern Virginia, and I was able to share with them on some of the opposition that we faced in coming here and being here to begin the work that God had placed in our hearts. And it wasn't until after it had kind of subsided, that was one of those things where you look back on and be like, we did it. Like, we stood the test. We withstood the temptation. We made it. We're going after what God has called us to do. And it was one of those moments where you have to understand that, like Pastor Steve said, this is grueling work. Like, church planting is putting a big target on your back for the enemy, saying, come and get me. Fire everything you can at me because I'm a child of God and I'm going to do something that's not going to make you happy. And when we do that, he wants to oppose everything that God is for. And so because God has placed a calling on each and every one of your life, you have to understand that no matter what you do, no matter where you are, wherever you work, live, play, study, or shop, there will be opposition to your work. There will be people where you work who you can't stand, but you have to pray for. There are going to be people on the road. There are going to be people in your homes who you don't even like, but you're going to invite them because you understand that your work is not to like them, it is to love them with the love of Christ. It's not my job to like everybody, but I'm called to love you all, so you're welcome. No, I'm just, oh. It's my pleasure, really. But that's what we are called to do as Christ followers, is to love other people. And loving them, it means getting involved in their lives. It means putting our hands in the dirt and getting messy with them and involved with them and helping them walk alongside this journey of life and pushing one another, sharpening one another unto great works. And so one of the things that these enemies kind of questioned, and it was their character. He questioned the character of the people. And we have to understand that people will question your character when you begin to go on mission for Jesus. They will always question your character because what it looks like you're doing looks ridiculous. It looks foolish. I can't tell you how many times people have asked us, why are you here? And not the type of why, like, we're so happy to see you, like, why of disdain. Like, why? Why are you here? What is your purpose here? When I first started working at the high school I'm at now, a lot of the students didn't ask me what my name was. They asked me why. Why are you here? Like, hi, how are you? You know, good morning to you as well. So glad you woke up this morning, that you're gifted with your presence. And it was one of those things where you have to be able to explain the mission to people who don't understand the mission. In the hopes, not that they would get it, but that you would just begin to plant a seed of like, I'm here not because I just love to be here. I'm here because God has called me here, and that love that to be here is from him. That desire and calling to be here is because I do my best, we do our best to align our heart with his. So that what we do and why we do, there's no question about it. So when people question your character and they question your integrity, all you have to do is just wait, because God's going to show them who you are and why you're there. That's what he did for Nehemiah. That's what he's doing for his people today. And so we have to make a decision to obey Christ no matter the cost, because people will give you reason after reason as to why what God has birthed inside of you should never be. They're going to tell you what's wrong with everything you're trying to do. But you can't allow your own thoughts or their thoughts to get in the way of a genuine, God-given vision. Because those people are not going to be held responsible for your calling. They're not going to have to answer to the Lord, to the King of the universe, for your actions. Some of us need to understand, we need a kick in the butt, because we have to understand that those people who we think are controlling us because of their own thoughts or what they write online or the reasons they tell us why we shouldn't be doing this or why we shouldn't be sharing the gospel, why we shouldn't be welcoming our enemies into our homes to help befriend them and help them understand the love of Christ. See, those people, those thoughts can manipulate you and control you to go down a path you should never be down. But if only you would stick with Jesus, if only you would stick with his plan, if only you would obey his calling, you would reap a harvest you've never seen. You would experience something in your life that you could never plan for. That's the beauty of the vision. Their enemies questioned their ability. They questioned their thought, like, are they even capable of doing this? And we have to understand that we have to get on our knees and fight for this city, to fight for your vision, to fight for what God has called you to. Because if you're not willing to fight for it, no one else will. There were moments there in Virginia where my wife and I are like, should we even go? Is this something that we should even do? And it was in that moment where I was like, that is a lie from the enemy. Because the calling on our lives is so strong. It's so deep. It's so powerful. It emanates from everything that we do and who we are as a people, as his people. And so for me to say, no, we shouldn't go, is sin. To disobey him and his calling on my life. The enemy challenged them to finish what they started. And they questioned the ability and the feasibility of this project, this massive wall to rebuild something that was torn down over centuries of decades of war, and the wall was open like a wound. And so people, there was no dignity there. People just lived there just to live there. They didn't feel safe or protected. They didn't understand that. But Nehemiah inspired them by reminding them of the vision, because it wasn't just Nehemiah's vision for Jerusalem anymore. It was theirs. They took it as their own. Because no matter how difficult the vision, God is more than enough to comfort us. And we always have to remember this. The third thing is this: to trust Jesus through the construction. To trust Jesus through the construction. And in Nehemiah chapter 4, from verses 6 to 9, we see that Nehemiah has built the wall at this point to half of its height. And Sanballat and his friends are wondering, kind of petitioning and devising and scheming against him. And they want the wall, they want their work to be over with, because they're getting money. They're getting wealthy from the poor and the broken down people in Jerusalem at this point. And they don't want Nehemiah to succeed. They don't want the people to thrive. They don't want their wall to be rebuilt. And Nehemiah is there, and he's saying, listen, so what we're going to do is we're not only going to work night and day, we're going to have a hammer in one hand, a spear in the other. That's how we ought to live. Now, I don't want you to run and go out buy spears. That's not what I'm saying. I don't want this spear throwing contest. But I want us to understand that this is how we ought to operate. Because it's just like a hammer. A hammer is a great tool to build, but can also be a weapon to destroy. And so if we are to understand that the Bible is living and active, and Hebrews talk about it sharper than a double-edged sword, that it cuts down to the very bones and marrow, that it understands who we are, that the Bible can cut us to the quick, to our core, right? We should understand that what Nehemiah is saying here and what we ought to be doing is that our word and his word and our life should be like a hammer in one hand and a spear in the other. And when the time comes, yes, we're there. We're in our communities. We're in our church. We're building relationships. We're building up the name of Jesus. But then there are times when we have to get on our knees and fight against the enemy. And we have to thwart his plans, not by our own power, but by the power that he has given us through the blood of his Son. That's who we ought to be. We ought to be a people who have a mind to do the work of the ministry of reconciliation, to reconcile a lost people to a holy, righteous God. That's our work. That's our joy. That's our pleasure. That's the vision. And so I believe that each and every person in here has a God-given vision. God has given you giftedness, and he's blessed you with the things that you need to do his work. But have you sought after the vision? Have you fought for the vision? Have you gone after something that's so much greater than yourself, you get lost in it? Like, we have to understand that even through this time of building, Jesus has to be the source. They made such good speed that in the little time that they had to run up the wall to half its height, for the people, why? Had a mind to work. Their hearts were set upon it, and they would have it forwarded. And we have to understand that the attacks of the enemy should rather quicken us to our duty than drive us away from it. Notice that's exactly what Nehemiah did. As the rumors and taunts of the enemy got bigger, the people drew closer together. See, the church, unfortunately, has a tendency to separate when things get tough. We forget that our God is bigger than any situation on this earth. No matter what mountain or trial or temptation, he's greater than all of it. And I want to encourage you tonight that even in those moments in your own life when you feel like I don't need to be at church, or I shouldn't come to church, or I don't need to tell anyone about this, or I need to isolate myself, you need to pray in that moment and rebuke the lies of the enemy, and you need to get involved deeper in the community of his church. Because it's through that you will find true freedom and genuine biblical success. And if you want to know what that looks like, look at these people in Nehemiah. These men and women, they had their families there. Like, he assigned each family a part of the wall. So it wasn't just men and their servants. These were families coming together. Everyone had a job to do. There was weight on everyone's shoulders. Because the vision was so great that they wanted to restore a dignity of their city. Not just only that, but they wanted to see God move again. They were tired of being the people who heard the stories of what grandma and grandpa used to do because they believed in Jesus. They wanted a piece of their own. Because they understood that there's no salvific, like, salvation family plan. Jesus doesn't work like Sprint or T-Mobile. This isn't a family thing. You've got to get in on the ground floor right now by yourself. You make that decision. You jump in. Boom. You've got a family that's so vast and so beautiful and so colorful that you can't even express it. There aren't words enough to explain how amazing the family of God is. And you join into this amazing unit of people who have a mind to do the work of the ministry, because you have to realize you're no longer by yourself. You are surrounded by people who want to help you grow and rebuild the walls of your life. And sure, the workers became discouraged by their own fatigue, and the immensity of their task and the threats of their enemies. But Nehemiah responded by how? Increasing security and focusing their attention on God and reminding them of their duty. He says, listen, don't do this because you think this is just fun or something that needs to be done. We fight for God. And then he reminded them, not only is this a command from God, but you fight for those whom you love. Your vision should encompass those who are around you, and they should be worth fighting for. The neighbor who's loud, the guy at work who gets on your nerves, they're worth your time. They're worth your fighting power. Because you will have to stand one day and give an account for the walls that you built. And who are the people who dwell in those walls? Are they people that were a part of your vision? Are they people who you loved? Even those who you thought were unlovable? Like, will we do this? Will we stand together and see Christ be made known? We must be ready for battle at all times for the things that God has given worth. And that's why we must lastly fight for what has worth. We have to fight for what has our worth. And so Nehemiah is basically, he's understanding, he's telling them to come. He says, be not afraid of them, but behave yourselves valiantly, considering whom you fight under. And he reminds them of their captain. He says, remember the Lord, who is great and terrible. You think your enemies are great and terrible, but what are they in comparison to God, especially in opposition to them? He is great above them to control them, and he will be terrible to them. And when he comes to reckon with them, the Jews were willing to make temporary sacrifices and endure some discomfort to finish the work God had given them to do. And in this, they modeled for us what it means to serve God. It means that things are going to be uncomfortable. It means that we're going to get tired. It means that there will be days where we don't always enjoy what we do. But you have to remember, it's so worth it. I love this text because I want us to understand that Nehemiah and that Jesus, their correlation is this, that Jesus fights for his creation. Why? It's very simple. He loves you. And it's not a cheap love. It's not a lessened love. It is the greatest love that's ever been expressed. There is no love greater. In Luke 15, 8 through 10, there's a woman there that Jesus uses this parable of the lost coin. And he says this, or what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it. And when she has found it, she calls her friends and her neighbors together, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I lost. Likewise, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. This woman ascribed worth to that coin. Therefore, it was worth tearing up her house. When you lose something, you are willing to rip apart wherever the last place it was to find it, right? You rip up, it's in your car, you're tearing up your car. If it's in your room, you are flipping over mattresses, you're going under sheets, you're dumping out pillowcases, you're flipping over drawers, trying to find whatever it is that you lost. And this woman who lost this coin was so precious to her that she decided when she found it to have a party and invite her friends to say, come and see that I have found my coin which I had lost. And we have to understand that Jesus does the same for us. That when we are lost and he has been trying to find us, he has been trying to get a hold of us, he has been rejoicing over the fact that you have been found in him, righteous, holy, a child, a son and daughter of the Most High God. And that means you're worth rejoicing over. In Zephaniah 3, it says that Jesus dances over us. My God knows how to dance. He's got rhythm. Like, you don't understand. Jesus rejoices over the things that the people that he has lost. And one of the beautiful things is that Jesus is sweeping the house. He's lighting lamps all around you because he desires for you to be found in him. He desires for those who you consider your enemies to be found in him. And the lamps that he's lighting, maybe the broom that he's using is you in the life of someone else to maybe get them to the point where he is able to rejoice that that one lost coin is found. It's got to be a part of your vision. It's got to be a part of who you are. And here's the beauty of it, is that over the last 7 years, Freedom Hope Church has been a burden and a passion for us. It's a calling for us. And I can't tell you how awesome this moment really is. To be here with you tonight is a gift from God. Because what you're looking at is not the works of Dom. It's only Jesus. It's none but Jesus. Only he could do this in my life and bring me to this point. Only he can bring us together. Only he can bind us and move us forward. Only he can do that. Only he can restore and save and reconcile and rejoice in us and build a passion so deep, like the word says, it's like a fire shut up in your bones. It is so burning, it is so passionate that everything we do and say and believe, we are walking on grace and prayers and an overflow of his Spirit. That's what it takes to rebuild the walls of your life. That's what it's going to take for your God-given vision to come to fruition, to become a reality in your life and in the lives of your families, is for you to stand up to the things in your life that the enemy is using to thwart you and say, I will not stand for it anymore. And you rebuke the enemy and you bind whatever it is that is in your life, every demon, every devil that you need to get rid of, to say, I'm going to press toward the mark that which God has called me to. I'm going to run to him and watch him do amazing, spectacular things in and through your life. That's the God that I serve. Only he can do that. There's no other God in the universe who can proclaim that he is one who operates in the impossible. This morning when in Discovery class, I had the honor of teaching that as well, and I was able to share with them, I love just the power of God. It's spectacular. And how the power of salvation not only affected the future, what Christ did when he was nailed to the cross and he died there, and he was rose again on the third day. It didn't just affect those in the future, but it unlocked things for those who had already passed away. The power of God, that moment in history, had so much power and so much potency that it is still happening today. There's no other God. No other God that can minister to you and meet your need and give you a vision that's unfathomable and that looks like foolishness to everybody else, but to you, it looks doable. To you, it seems feasible because you realize it's not on me. You called me. You're going to do it. Let me be a participant in the miraculous. Let me witness your awe-inspiring power. That's all we want to do. That's what we want to see in our city. We want to see people be unleashed with the gospel. People who are enemies of God become children of the King of the universe. To see families be restored, marriages redeemed, youth leading and teaching, being examples where they are. That's the God that we serve. And you may think it's impossible. Oh, it's so real. But will you follow the vision? Will you do the work when you get tired when you get sleepy, when you get angry? Will you seek him? Will you begin on your knees? Will you understand that the opposition is not greater than your God? And will you know that what you're fighting for is always worth it? Always. Don't you ever forget it. I'm glad you're here tonight because I needed to remind you of that. It's worth it. It's always worth it. The prayers, the tears, the sleepless nights, you wondering if it's going to work, if it's going to fail, if it's going to fly, it's worth it. It's so worth it. That's the beauty of the gospel, is that through his death, burial, and resurrection, we get to experience something that's worth more than we could ever imagine. And we get to handle the greatest news that we'll ever hear, is that a loving God sent his son to die for us. And he did. He took our beating, he took our death, and he rose with all power and authority and dominion given unto him. And he did something even greater. He gave us his Spirit. He says, I will dwell within you and among you so that you can participate in what he does. That's the God that we serve. Isn't it amazing to know that we get to be a part of that and to see something amazing transpire?